There we go. Um, I just remembered to press the recording button. So, for all who may be viewing this in the future, uh, this is a little experiment of mine, which I am launching with my good friend Steve Yates, um, and which I hope to continue as we go along. Um, and the thing, what I'm calling this is writing the Ozarks, and my hope is to have conversations with some of the writers that I have gotten to know and to admire, and some that I haven't yet gotten to know as time goes on, just to talk about their work and talk about our home region and to sort of accumulate a series of videos which I will be posting to YouTube as time goes on. And Steve, I am really grateful that you joined, and I was going to hold up the product to my camera, but I can't hold it up because I can't get my camera to work. So if you wouldn't mind, there it is. I'm
Hey,
going to talk a bit about Steve's new novel, which is called The Lakes of Southern Hollow. And uh, I've had the chance to read it and enjoy it immensely. And um, just to give a little background, Steve Yates grew up in Springfield and uh, has created a considerable body of work. If memory serves, your first book-length publication was Morkan's Quarry back in 2010.
Hmm.
Am I right about that?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
In
right.
fact, oddity, the this book starts on August 10th. So here we are on August 10th, and
Well, 14 years later, the
yeah,
14th anniversary of the publication of Morkan's Quarry, which is historical in its nature. It takes place during the Civil War, but since then, Steve has written short story collections with contemporary settings, a lovely bittersweet novella called Sandy and Wayne, which is one of my favorites. Um, Kind of reworking of an old Springfield legend called The Legend of the Albino Farm. Um, so you don't confine yourself to a single genre, uh, that's for sure. And I'm kind of curious as to what drew you to this particular story and what pulled you into it.
well, it really started in an evening dinner discussion with some friends in Springfield after a signing for The Legend of the Albino Farm. We were all sitting around, and right at that moment in Springfield, it was a little flurry of news articles about John Q. Hammonds. He is a famed developer, at least in Springfield. I don't know that he would hate to hear me say this, so he's rolling over in his grave. I don't know that he was that famous outside of Springfield, but he had recently passed away, and there was bankruptcy going against his estate. It was, kind of the cratering and downfall of a great person, a great personage. And one of the oddities in that downfall, one of the things that was unraveling in the newspaper articles was the lakes that I grew up around in Southern Hills subdivision in Springfield. There are three of them, and they're called lakes, but they're about pond size. They're 4 acres, 5 acres or so. Uh, but they were one of them was famously polluted, First Lake in Springfield, and that was the one that I grew up closest to. And there was a big dust up about people trying to fix the lake and trying to sue because their waterfront property now, bordered a polluted lake, and you couldn't actually sue anybody because the two developers, John Q. Hammonds and Lee McLean, had placed the lakes in a shell company that couldn't be sued. I mean, there was nothing there. There was just the lake. And the reason they had done that is that some smart lawyer had said, well, if you build a lake in this subdivision and some toddler rolls down the hill into it and drowns, you're going to be sued. But let's put it in a shell company and then, you know, there you are. So that was interesting to me as a lawyer's son. But it would make a really crummy novel. I mean, you know, we already have a great novel about legal stuff in Bleak House, right? We don't need to rewrite the Dickens novel.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was thinking about growing up there, and I had noticed, especially when new people would come onto Facebook, you tend to eavesdrop when people do that, and several people were having a discussion about a little district in Southern Hills that I was familiar with, but I had never realized that they lived together within the same little uh, sector of that neighborhood. It's a very big subdivision, but it's got neat little pockets. And the things they were sharing were just so fascinating. All these little legends about, you know, do you remember when Bruce Bloxham did this and swung that snake over his head or whatever? All these little legends were just everywhere. And I began to think about what growing up there was like and think about, well, what's it like now? What's it like in 2019? And so that's how I got excited about it. And then I was thinking a lot. I'd always really wanted to write a novel about people trying to make music. You know, I'd been in several very, very terrible bands, and it was always fun, but I it I wanted to write something about that, and so that got the spark going.
Okay. I noticed that you seem to have a considerable, excuse me, familiarity with the making and recording of music in the book. The one of the three main characters, Casey, is kind of a one of a generational kind of talent as a singer, and all the details about the making of music, playing in bands in shabby saloons, and that all seemed to really ring true. So I had wondered if you had a background in playing music. But on the other hand, I remember when I was reading Sandy and Wayne, I thought the same thing about you and horse breeding. Turned out that you were just a heck of a good researcher. So I wasn't sure whether you were drawing from experience or research on that.
So yeah, some of that was lived, and then also, you know, I spent some time. I'm lucky enough to still know people in Springfield who, you know, they're trying to make music, and one of them was Andy Havens, and I interviewed Andy for a long time over coffee somewhere, and realized, you know, I would love to get into a studio with you because that's not anything that any band of ours ever did. You know, we had probably the fanciest thing we ever had was a 4-track Fostex that was really amazing for the little device that it was. But that's still not studio. That's nothing like what an actual studio feels like. And Andy had a Sunday night studio session booked, and he talked with the sound engineer and the owner, and they said, well, you know, we don't care if your pal hangs out. And if it doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother us. You're the one paying for the time. And so Andy let me in on that, and I got to watch, you know, a whole night of studio recording and overdubbing and really the best that Springfield has to offer. And that was, you know, incredibly helpful. That was just a blast. And um, So that was kind of lived research, you know what I mean? You get to really
Mhm.
go see people do what they're doing. And I didn't have to ask too many questions because, of course, Casey it is new to that as well. It's the first time she ever gets to be in a studio. And so I didn't want to overload myself with, sound engineer details that
All
you could
right.
only know if you've been doing that for, a George Martin period of time or something. Uh,
Right.
but that was very helpful. And there was a book that was very, very helpful by Liv Albertine. I don't know if you're familiar with that punk personage from the UK. She was in an all-girl band called the Slits. And she wrote a book, I think it's called Boys, 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 Clothes, 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 Music, Music, Music. And that big long title is, that's what the book's about, boys, clothes, and music. And she has a great scene in there where they're first in the when they're in the studio for the first time, and how really frightening it is. It's
Yeah.
nobody's there to cheer. There's no crowd saying yay. There's no moment where people say, "Oh, this is my favorite song," and they burst out of their seats and start dancing or something like that. It's just you and a cold microphone, and you and an amplifier, and you and a whole bunch of pop mounts and things like that. So that was really helpful too to get that perspective.
Yeah. I can imagine. It's always interesting um, the inner workings of any closed system, are always fascinating to the outsider, and I think that's the appeal of a lot of novels that take you inside, whatever it might happen to be, the corporation or the university or the industry or whatever it happens.
Yeah.
Um, I should add the, the main characters in this book are all in their late teens. Um, they're finishing high school, um, but I don't get what you would call a YA vibe from this book.
Hmm.
Um, Normally when you think about a novel that's peopled by young folks of that age, your mind immediately goes to YA and to sort of the story structure and the things that can and cannot happen in that genre. Um, so, and how did you contemplate that as a kind of challenge or an issue as you were writing it? That you were writing a book with a bunch of teenagers in it, and how to approach that?
I thought about it a little bit, and that, there were language levels that I wanted to maintain and language levels that I didn't want to step into, and then also language levels that I didn't want to dumb down to. I think that I don't think you have to write down to anyone who's 17 years old. I mean, I was around a lot of really, really, really smart people when I was at Glendale High School, and um, I have to write down to them. But it has been a little bit of a strange experience because reviewers have already classified it as a YA novel, and looking back, it's like, well, okay, Morkan's Quarry was about a kid who was 16 at the beginning of the book, and nobody said a word about YA during
Yeah,
that. During 2010, nobody said a word about that. And so I just thought, well, just write the best novel that you can. You've got these three characters. You've got Casey, Tyndall, and Devon, and just write what their conflicts are, right? What their problems are, right? What they're trying to overcome. Uh, and whatever happens, happens. If it's any good, it'll
yeah,
transcend a genre, And I think YA is pretty broadly variant. I mean, you've got everything. I mean, Catcher in the Rye is considered YA now. Okay.
true.
And there are a lot of books that we've read that I guess would be YA. Anytime you put somebody did warn me, Brad Barkley, an author that I went to school with and that I very much admire. He warned me anytime you start writing someone who's under 30, you're going to end up being called YA. Well, really anybody under 21,
Yeah, yeah. Um, the the dynamics among the three characters, Devin, Tyndall, and Casey, are quite complicated to say the least. In that, and I don't want to give great amounts of story away, but Tyndall is a um, would be recognizable in a lot of Springfield, in that she is the child of very religious parents, and is very religious herself in a kind of fundamental way, that sort of megachurch kind of way. Um, Casey, the singer, is uh, how would I describe her? As well as, I guess, rebellious, troubled, and but also greatly insecure in many ways. And then Devon is, you know, finding his way. He's the son of a business owner who's not very good at managing his business, and so he carries a considerable burden with him. Um, I'm curious, how do you juggle these three very different characters, whom I have to say, at different times in the book, each one sort of steps into the front and becomes, at least for the period, the main character of the novel. That seemed like quite a challenge to me.
Well, maybe part of it is just maybe part of it is that I work 50 hours a week at a university press, and I don't my writing time is super compressed. I wake up at 3 in the morning and I write until about 6, and then I have to go work out and do things like that. So between somewhere between there, I need to eat breakfast, right? So I don't really get a full 3 hours. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not that I get bored with the storyline, but I strongly feel like, storylines that can interchange like that, since all three kids are falling in love with each other at the wrong time,
Mhm.
is a main theme of the book. Um, that helped a lot, in that, they were each following each other's sort of, love life, and that Casey wants Tyndall and Devon to get along, and Casey also suddenly discovers, here's a surprise, I'm really attracted to Tyndall. Um, those That interchange kept me writing. It kept me
Mhm.
sparked to say, okay, well, now I'm going to have a chapter that Tyndall runs. She's going to do this chapter because she needs to go to her psychologist. She needs to go to that therapist. And now I'm going to have Casey run a chapter because she's busting up with the band that she's in, and she's trying to record with this thug who has a whole lot of followers on YouTube, and has had the kind of YouTube hit song that happens before you get a record deal sometimes. And he's the one who leads her to the studio and things like that. So that interchange kept me writing. And I felt the more that I read it, because I'll write a long manuscript, then I'll put it away for a little while and just let it marinate, and then I'll print the whole thing out about maybe a 3-month period later, and then go back to it and reread it. And that's a super helpful way to not only catch the stinkers that are there, the bad parts you've written, but it became really obvious that I'd done something right. That this interchange between the three of them, and sort of mixing and matching those chapters caused a propulsion, because every chapter about Devon had Casey and Tyndall in it somewhere. And then when
Right.
you picked up with a Tyndall chapter, it had a lot to do with Devon and it had a lot to do with Casey. And so that was a lot of fun. It
Yeah.
was it the book wrote itself fast, even though it's 7 years since my last novel. It wrote itself very quickly when I was writing it.
Uh-huh. Interesting. Um, One thing that I took note of among those characters, and this is one of those kind of questions where you almost hate to ask it because I don't mean to suggest something, but um, I wondered the each of the three characters has what you might think of as a an androgynous name. I mean, it's a
Oh,
name that we see applied to male and female alike. And I
mhm.
wondered whether you were up to something with that, or whether they were just names that came to you and was sort of out of the left field
There
without
were more
even asking
names.
the
Yeah,
question.
there were more names that came to me. The Casey's mom had been in a short story in that short story collection from 2015, the Some Kinds of Love. She was in a short story when she was about Casey's age, and it was that story about pursuing Ether Eddy, about trying to catch that horrible Southern Hills uh, boogeyman. And so now she's all grown up. She married a cop. She was the daughter of a cop in that story. She's married a cop, and now she's a widow because the cop has been killed by tweakers. Um, so Casey was a natural name for somebody whose mom was Cassie. And so that one came up. Tyndall Hastings was like a collision of two women now, but girls that I grew up with that I really, really admired. So I just combined a first name and a last name. No, two last names to make
Okay.
a whole name. Yeah, Jennifer Hastings was this girl who she always won all the writing contests at Glendale. It was just infuriating.
Uh-huh.
I really admired her. I was like, man, she's really something else. So we had all kinds of, like, 5 paragraph themes that they forced us to do, and stuff that I just couldn't do, but she could really write. She was great. And I don't know what happened to her, but there she is, admired in my book. And
Okay.
Devon is ripped off from I'm really close friends with these wonderful, wonderful people. Tim Rathman was a Glendale friend who, had I not known him well in Glendale, I would have never made it through Glendale. And he's got a son named Devon, and I just thought, well, that's a cool name. I'll just steal that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Name, you know, names are at once the easiest and the hardest thing sometimes, and if you have a character whose name is not quite right, I don't know about you, but it just drives me nuts. It drives me crazy, and I find myself going through long lists of names, hunting for the hunting for the right name, and somehow it's not necessarily anything symbolic or particularly meaningful, but it just has to sound right somehow. I don't know whether there's any further explanation on that. But,
Well, were there any characters that you renamed in your series?
yeah, I can't think of them right uh, at the moment, but I'll have to I have to give that a little bit of thought. But there have been
Because
characters where I've really really grappled with the name for what
wow.
seemed like weeks and months, and then that. thank goodness for word processing, because then once you land on the right name, all you have to do is do a control
Right,
R, find and replace, or whatever
right,
that
right, right.
command is.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you know what, Steve, I don't know that I've ever struggled with that. I kind of think,
Uh-huh.
I'm pretty sure that once they were ready to be published, they had lived with me for so long that I could almost not think of them otherwise. I do remember in way back at Arkansas in MFA school, I can remember I guess I was really tired or something, but I started into a story and the main character was bebopping along and was happily Eddie Murphy for many, many pages. And of
Oh,
course, a good friend immediately said, well, you may want to think about that.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, right,
that name,
right.
that
Yeah.
name is
Mhm.
officially off
Yeah.
the table. Funny.
Oops.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm calling this series of conversations that I'm doing, writing the Ozarks, and Casey at one point in the novel and Devin talk about being Ozarkers and what it means to them, and the issues that they deal with. So I kind of want to pose that to you in the sense of how much do does your concept of the Ozarks figure into this book, and um, it and what is your concept of the Ozarks as a writer, and how do you deal with that?
Well, I think one of the things that I really um, that really made me want to write this book was that it seemed very often there were so many talented musicians in Springfield, so many people who had just incredible skills and could do wonderful things. And it seemed so very, very hard to break out and to become something beyond just an Ozarks phenomenon. I mean,
Hmm.
we gr grew up in the Ozarks, we lived in the Ozarks, so to us, like the Ozark Mountain Daredevils, they're a big, 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 big thing. But outside of the Ozarks, not so much. People think of them as one criticism that someone had about the book was that you shouldn't refer to these guys, they're just one-hit wonders. And I thought,
Yeah,
well, I don't think you can be a kid growing up in the Ozarks and making music and think of them quite that way. So so that was one of the main struggles that I wanted Casey to deal with was, I've got this tremendous talent, but I want more than 150 people in a bar or in a music hall above a law firm to know who I am. It's if you go through the list of Springfield bands and people who have done things, it is a little bit it is a little bit sparse in people who have made that superstar moment happen. I mean, Chapel Rowan is out there making a whole lot of music and making a whole lot of people happy. And but I mean, she's from Willard, and she did choose to move to Los Angeles to make
hmm,
more things happen. So, and of course, if you write a book, immediately something in history like Chapel Rowan comes along, and it's like,
right.
well, there goes that premise.
Well,
She's got a
it
superhero.
does and it doesn't. I think in that that sense of uh, nurturing and also limitation is part and parcel of the Ozarks terrain, as in any kind of cultural artistic production. You're always kind of contending with that. So
Yeah, I mean, a holler can be a shelter, and it can also be a trap.
exactly.
It can be a place that nurtures you and that you grow up in and that you understand the streams and the lakes and you know what fish are there, you know what trees are there. And it can also be really, really limiting. You look up and see jet contrail, and you think, God, I wonder where they're going. I wonder what
Mhm.
cool things are going to happen for those people in that airplane that I've never been in. So that's a very Ozarks thing.
Yeah,
And yeah, and I wanted them to struggle, or I wanted Casey to struggle with that especially. And of course,
right,
Devin, Tyndall and Devin are wondering, when is she going to become a superstar? She's going to blow out of here like a bullet. She's going to be gone.
right. One thing I wanted to touch on where my Zoom time is getting close to running out, but I definitely wanted to bring this up. The novel begins in the fall of 2019. And of
Mhm.
course, all of us who are alive on the earth now know what happened in the fall and winter 2019, 2020.
Mhm.
And of course, that happens in the book. The pandemic comes and totally disrupts everything. And I'm curious how that affected your thinking about the story. Um, where,
Well,
where, where do you place that in terms of your creative thinking about it?
Well, it was a help in that it was a giant challenge especially for someone who's trying to make music like Casey was. There was no music to be made unless you were already famous, and then you could have Zoom sessions. But it's like, well, I'm not the Foo Fighters, so who's going to tune into my Zoom session if nobody knows who I am? But I was witnessing my nieces go through this. They were both in Oregon. They were seniors, and they were the set of seniors to whom, or at least Lauren Grace was a senior to whom the school administration said, "Hey, surprise! I know it's March, but you graduated. Bye."
Yeah,
And for her, she was really resilient and already ready to go to Grand Canyon University and get out of McMinnville for a while. But the younger one, Ashley Lynn, for her, it was a mess because she was dealing with all the online classes and dealing with things that were canceled that you're kind of counting on, like the
right. Yeah,
prom and all those kind of things. Those seem like teeny tiny things, but but that was a really crazy pressure cooker to put the kids through.
hmm,
And then Tyndall, since she worked in a hospital, that was really a challenge to write, but it was also, I think, exactly what needed to be written for this to show the full experience of the pandemic. There are many, many, many frontline healthcare workers who saw things that they're never going to see again because they quit. They said, this is too much.
yeah,
We're talking about,
absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, in some respects, it's sort of, what we're writing today if we're writing with a contemporary setting is sort of our versions of the Journal of the Plague Year, where and that you can't not deal with it. It's
Mhm,
something that has layered over all of our experiences and
mhm.
affected them in strange, unexpected, and disruptive uh, ways. So,
I
and
mean,
and it's it's
here
really
we,
interesting to see people grappling with that as they write.
oh yeah. Well, I mean,
How do you deal with it?
here we are on Zoom, and
Yeah.
we learned this during the pandemic, right?
In my
Right?
case, I barely learned it.
Well,
And
you'll
you
be
can
fine. It'll be okay.
tell. Uh, for those who are watching now and who will be watching in the future, let me just remark on something, which is that Steve maintains a blog, and so if you, let me type this into the chat box so that it'll be permanently preserved. It's fiction and history dot wordpress dot com. So if you want to see more of Steve's thoughts, look that up, bookmark it, and save it for return visits. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Steve, is there something that you want to mention that I have failed to ask you about, or something that's just burning on your mind to talk about?
You know, I guess we should talk a little bit more about how hard is it to place a book about the Ozarks into the world, right? You
Yeah.
know, when I was seeking an agent for this book, I would get responses from agents in New York that said things like, "Well, we don't really want to see another book about addiction in Appalachia." And you're
Uh,
just like, so
excuse me.
yeah, and I think too there's a real resistance in New York to anything about the pandemic. They don't want a novel about that. I mean, unless you're
Yeah,
John Latham or something like that, but they don't want a novel about that. So I mean, have you found that it's hard to get a novel outside of the Ozarks to get the attention to what you're trying to do?
absolutely, absolutely. Um, it's I like to say it's uphill both ways. It is really really hard to get. Well, it's hard, for anyone to get attention with a novel
Yeah,
unless they've already had massive success. Because then it's doubly hard if where you're coming from is perceived as an out of the way place that's already been done, or that
it's
there's
already
some
been
kind
done the
of
way they want it, right?
eccentricity to it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's already been done the one way that they want to hear about it. I mean, they can digest another crime novel about the Ozarks, but I don't think
yeah.
they can digest another, literary novel about music or a literary novel about the descendants and people who were in a utopian colony like your series is.
Yeah,
It's really, a little frustrating.
it is indeed. But we we carry on.
We do. We carry on and we find, I mean, I'm so grateful that Madville Publishing published this. I'm just delighted. We've got a question in the chat. Steve, do we have time
Yes, Susan
for
Kirkpatrick uh, asks about how real are the characters to you? Do they become part of your life?
Oh gosh, that is a super question, and yeah, they do. And they become parts of your life in really strange ways. There were a lot of things happening in my life that almost shut this book down. One of the ones
Uh-huh.
was that my mother died, and
Ah,
it was, I mean, that's a huge jolt. It's a giant,
okay. We are
giant.
down to our last few seconds on my Zoom
My,
chat.
well,
So
they do. Casey was facing me one night in a dream and tapping her toe and saying, "Go, go, go, get this done."
hold up the book one more time, Steve. Let's get that image in here. The
Okay.
Lakes of Southern Hollow by Steve Yates. Thank you so much, Steve. It's
You
been a
got it,
great
Steve.
pleasure.
All right,
See
I
you
look
soon, I
forward to
hope.
all the next ones. Bye bye.
All righty. Bye bye. Take care. Thanks everybody for watching.